You might as well start, Abby.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, folks, depending where you are. Welcome to the first Free Thought Blogs webcast in honor of the 10th anniversary of the network's founding. What was that?
Charge.
What a lovely start. We've been starting. Let's everyone go around in the order predefined conveniently for the circumstances and introduce ourselves.
Okay, I'm PZ Myers, and I sort of started the blog once upon a time, and now I just let everybody else do all the work and sit back and enjoy myself.
And I'm Cryptike. Is my audio on?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So I'm Cryptike, and I've been around for about, 3-4 years as a blogger, but was around much longer than that as a commenter. I've really enjoyed Free Thought blogs, and I hope that one or two of the people watching have read a few things by me at some point.
I'm Sarah. I post as Dr. Sarah, and I have the Geeky Humanist blog, and I've been here just over 5 years, so just over half the time that Free Thought Blogs has been around, and I write mostly book reviews.
Yeah, I'm Christian, or I have the blog Pro Science, and I've been around the same amount of time as Sarah. We started at the same time, we think. I live in Copenhagen, Denmark, so I have a little bit different perspective. I'm not as busy a blogger as I should be, like in most other than PC probably would admit here that they are.
Hey, and I'm William Brinkman. I do the Bolingbrook Babbler. I've been around for about 4 years, and so you see the weird Weekly World News tabloid style in the left column headlines. That's me.
And I'm Jeff Shallett, and I have a blog called Recursivity, and I've been in Free Thought blogs for I have no idea how long, and I don't do as much as I should, and you can yell at me.
Hey, that's my line. That's my line. I'm H.J. Hornbeck. I blog at Reprobate Spreadsheet. Same deal as that. I've hung around Frangula since probably about 2004 or something, just as a reader, but I recently joined as a blogger and happy to be here in chat.
And I am, for the purposes of today at least, your host, Abby St. Brendan from Impossible Me. I'd like to say I blog at Impossible Me, but that might be overstating the verb, I'm afraid. But hopefully we can have some fun today, and I'll actually serve some kind of purpose for the blog network. So in honor of the 10th anniversary of Free Thought Blogs, we are not only starting this, but also going to talk a bit about what Free Thought Blogs has been and hopefully will be at some point in the future. So to start the discussion, let's please go around the same way and tell me, what are your memories of Free Thought Blogs? What's it been like for you? Good moments, bad moments?
Boy, you're asking me, and I've been around for a long time. So
yes, we wish to tap the ancient lore.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I can give you a brief potted history of everything. So back in the 1990s, yeah, began that long ago. I had the beginnings of a blog somewhere in there, and yeah, I set up a lab website, and I was posting periodic updates. It wasn't called Pharyngula, though. It was called the Myers Lab. Just that. Where things changed was in June 2002. I downloaded this content management system. Does anybody remember those? From Appalachian State University, and I put it on my lab computer. I had real blog tools on there, stuff like RSS and all this cool stuff. And I created an official, real, genuine blog called Pharyngula. And it was easy to subscribe, and I gave entertainingly annoyed opinions every day. So it started to take off. In January 2006, Adam Bly invited me to join Science Blogs, which he was just starting up. And he also invited me to contribute to their magazine, Seed. Seed was a really good, popular science magazine. And Science Blogs, in its heyday, was a pretty good place to be too. I still don't know where the money came from for it, though. That's a little bit worrisome. I know that Bly had connections to the very rich and also very well-connected people in New York. I know John Brockman was involved somehow. You know, John Brockman, the science publisher, who was his mentor. And who knows where the money came from? Jeffrey Epstein, maybe. It's just, it was, this is a problem, actually. We were running on mystery money. And it was a good couple of years before the wheels started to fall off, when the mystery money started to dry up. And then we started getting all these signals that the budget may not be supportable, and Seed was frantically trying to sell ads to keep everything going. So it really started to fall apart in, I would say, June of 2010. So 11 years ago, there was this thing called Pepsi Gate. I don't know if anybody remembers it, but basically Seed sold a blog slot to PepsiCo, which is a little bit unethical, because then they were advertising this is a blog with independent bloggers writing about science, when it was really a front for Pepsi.
The science of why is Pepsi so wonderful? Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's kind of how we felt about it. It made some of us feel like, not only is this blog over here an ad, but that means we must be an ad too. We're there to provide the content to sell ads, and it just got really annoying. The journalists and ethicists in the group were horrified, and they split. We had this massive departure of bloggers from the network, and there was a lot of wrangling and conflict over the incident. And there's actually the seeds of something very bad that were sown then. The loudest voice in favor of having Pepsi on the blog network was Abby Smith of the blog called ERV. And some of you new kids might not know about this, but
I didn't know you ever had another Abby. I thought I was the first. I'm feeling a little sad now. It's like, oh.
Oh. No, you are a great improvement on the old Abby. So it's all good. You have rescued the name. Anyway, Abby she decided that all the bloggers who were upset at the breach of ethics were hysterical fatties. And they called one of us an ungrateful media whore. All this fun stuff. It was a real steep schism in science blogs, and it was a portent of what was to come. So the spring and summer of 2011, oh boy, in April of 2011, National Geographic bought Science Blogs, which Seed announced was no longer financially viable, and the diaspora begins. People started leaving en masse. It was just all going away really fast. A few blogs tried to aggregate as a new independent network, like Scientopia, which is now defunct, sadly. Some good science bloggers are there. Others, like Ethan Siegel's Starts with a Bang, moved to Medium or got snapped up by Pathos. So Pathos benefited a lot from this.
Question.
Yes.
The whole everyone is media whores thing. Are you saying we can get paid for this?
Not anymore.
Okay, so we're just media sluts. Gotcha. Please continue.
Yes, we're putting it out for free, which is better, right? Anyway, so a lot of the other science bloggers went totally independent, like Tet Zoo and Respectful Insolence. These are really good science blogs that are out there. And they just said, we're not going to do this anymore. And they just set up their own blogs. And I was contemplating that. I was thinking of going freelance. I'll just go I'll go create a WordPress blog and I'll be done. But I got tangled up in some other things that kept me occupied for a while. 2011 was a really awkward year. So June of 2011, I attended the World Atheist Convention in Dublin. Nobody remembers me being there, but Rebecca Watson was a speaker. And Rebecca was invited in an elevator to a gentleman's room, which she responded to by hysterically and shrilly screaming, "Hey guys, don't do that." And started this whole big shitstorm that was going on. Once again, one of the big antagonists in that whole thing was good old Abby Smith. Abby Smith started a little thread on her blog called The Slime Pit, which was all these people ranting and raving about those darn feminists ruining atheism. She was asked
She
to...
started the Slime Pit?
Yes,
Yep.
she did.
Christ,
Oh,
I got a
yes.
lot of work to do to redeem the name.
Yeah, yeah, man, we're going to expect a lot from you. Anyway, it started off as just this ongoing thread on her blog, and the National Geographic actually stepped in and said, "This is kind of disgusting. You got all these people talking about rape and pedophilia and kill the feminists and all this sort of stuff," and they told her to stop it, shut it down. So she did, and a bunch of them moved off and started a forum called the Slime Pit. So the Slime Pit is still out there. Slime Pit has been going strong as long as Free Thought blogs. Isn't that nice to know? Anyway, for those of you who don't know the Slime Pit, here's a description by Ashley Miller, who was a blogger here for a while back when. The Slime Pit, a forum or opposite of a fan club dedicated to hateful obsession with skeptics and free thought blogs. Think 4chan, but obsessed with a very small number of people. They make photoshops, videos, write stories, tell rape, PTSD jokes, come up with crude nicknames, stalk our home addresses, workplaces, and use hospitalizations to start STD rumors, that sort of thing. Yeah, so they were a plague for a long time. They're still in existence, but they're kind of withering away slowly. So we can hope they'll go away completely sometime. Anyway, so I left science blogs, not because of Abby or because of the Slime Pit, but because Nat Geo made it clear that they were going to be censoring and editing content. I was initially going to just set up my own WordPress blog, but Ed Brayton comes along. Ed Brayton was also on Science Blog, and he came to me and suggested, since the two of us at that time were the two biggest blogs on the network, we ought to team up and make our own network. Only the difference would be that this network would be one that explicitly supported social justice. So you had to be a supporter of social justice as a prerequisite for blogging here. That's still true. Ed decided to call it Free Thought Blogs. He came up with a name. As Abby and I were talking earlier, I came up with all kinds of rude, crude names like the Flamboyantly Atheist Blog Network. And wisely, Ed said, basically, no, we're not going to have atheism anywhere in the name because of the way atheism has gone in the last few years. It's a very smart move. I'm glad he did that now. Anyway, so here we are. It's been a rocky decade with a lot of ups and downs, with a fair bit of blogger turnover. For instance, a year after setting up shop, we recruited Phil Mason, also known as Thunderfoot, to set up a blog here. You might be asking, what happened to our commitment to social justice? We had been seduced by his popularity and sort of temporarily set that commitment aside, not knowing about his position on a lot of issues. We invited him in, and he came in and immediately started shrieking out this regressive anti-feminist nonsense. He lasted a whole week, and then we shut him down. That was a big bit of drama back in, what was that, 2012, way back when. So we're more careful about who we take on now. We're still willing to take on new bloggers. So suggestion to anyone listening, if you're interested, let us know. But we need two things. We need some evidence that you're capable of writing. Yeah, and saying I would like to write is not good enough. We want to see that you have been writing and you've written interesting things. And then the other thing is, yeah, you better be clear that you're on the right side of social justice. Okay. Yeah, we're not going to have another Thunderfoot episode. If it happened again, it would last a day at most. Okay, so
insert here a lot of screaming from detractors who have nothing better to do about how not free the free thought is.
Oh yes, we got all that.
They like that.
They just don't understand that's not what free thought is about. But anyway, so the last thing, Science Blog lingered on. It was a shadow of itself, and it was finally terminated by National Geographic in October of 2017. So it wasn't that long ago they shut it down. Unfortunately, it was then immediately, almost, bought up by a conservative group calling itself Science 2.0 in August of 2018. So it's back. You can find it again. My old blog is still there. It's amazing. But it was put back in operation as a zombie blog network. They had a couple of people who were recruited to post. Rather, there was an outright racist who was posting there for a while, but for the most part, they just bought all the content, put it on the web, use it as a matrix for selling ads. But as far as blogging goes, it's basically dead. So all of our posts were dug up out of the grave and put on display just as a placeholder for ads. It's kind of sad. So it's still there. Anyway, so Midsummer 2021, right now, it is the 19th anniversary of Pharyngula. It is the 10th anniversary of Elevator Gate. It's the 9th anniversary of kicking Thunderfoot's ass out of here. And the 3rd anniversary of Undead Science Blog's Ugly Resurrection. Everybody seemed to be doing things midsummers for some reason. Anyway, as well as the important thing, it's the 10th anniversary of this lively, healthy blog network. So we've supported over 100 blogs over the years, with about 29 currently active to varying degrees of activity. Jeff, don't worry, we do not have a posting requirement. You're there to add dignitas and intelligence to the network, right?
Arguably the opposite of why I was included.
You're here to bring charm and humor and wit.
But do you not know me?
So it's been a good decade, and we've got all these nice people, some of whom are here today to celebrate it. So I will shut up there and let you guys go on.
Number 2, let's
proceed,
so please.
Me.
Go ahead.
So I actually remember quite a lot of what PZ was talking about. I first encountered Pharyngula as I guess on science blogs. I think I'd only read it once before Crackergate, and then I read Crackergate, or at least a lot of Crackergate. But I was not a commenter, and then sometime while it was still on science blogs, I issued my first tentative comment, and I believe, if I remember correctly, my very first comment was a tone argument, which was not received well at all. I hung back and I stayed quiet a little longer, and then 3D 4K happened, 3-day 4K, which was the huge comment thread with 4,000 comments about Elevator Gate that PZ was talking about, and sometime either during 3-day 4K or just after is when I started becoming a commenter. So I've been commenting since before we got Free Thought Blogs instantiated as it was. And I have many good memories. I had friendships with Kane and Giliel and RQ and so many great people over the years. And those are just a few of the people who kind of sucked me in and made me part of the commenting community right away. I remember when I first started commenting heavily, PZ was still doing the mollies. That's how long ago it was. Which was an award for somebody who had contributed well to the comments over the previous month. And it was named after Molly Ivins, the Order of Molly. If you're not familiar with that little bit of history. But I continued to comment for quite a long time. At one point, PZ allowed me to make a few guest posts on Fringula because people were asking some questions about gender that I was prepared to answer, and that not a whole lot of other people had my academic background and were able to answer on the network. And so we did a few gender workshops on Fringula, and that would have been the first time that I had anything like blogger status, although obviously it wasn't my own blog. I was just PZ's guest. But then about 3-4 years ago, after commenting for all that time, I asked to be a blogger in my own right and set up Pervert Justice. I'm gonna forget who was the lovely artist who made my my banner artwork for the Pervert Justice banner. I do have that information on the Pervert website, on the Pervert Justice website. So you should go there. You should check it out. And the person who did the art was great. I loved it. It turned out very well. And so now I have my own little corner, and it's not. It didn't turn out to be at all what I thought it might be. I thought it might be home to my most didactic inclinations. And as part of that, I originally thought that I would do a weekly or monthly feature on famous feminists and the ethical philosophy of those different individual feminists and how they fit into the overall structure of ethical growth and change in how societies view ethical systems over the last couple hundred years in the UK, Canada, the United States, most of the English-speaking world, right? Because I do have a lot of training in that, and I do think that individual feminists are interesting. And one of the things that I think is dramatically underappreciated is just how the nature of feminist thought has changed. We often talk about waves in feminism generationally, but I think that the interesting thing about feminist waves, at least the first wave and the second wave, and there's kind of an emerging distinction with the third wave, wasn't really about the times that they were operating in, the generations between them, or even the issues that they were working on, but what was the basis for their ethical claim that we should embrace these feminist positions? And many years ago, post Seneca Falls, there was very much a contractarian feminism where we were saying, hey, we're part of society. We deserve to have the same rights afforded to us by the government. It was about ending slavery. It was about the right to vote. And these were about having the same contractual rights-based positions relative to other people with respect to the government and a few important institutions. It also, the contractarian position was confused a little bit with a position on education, but that, as explained through Rousseau and Wollstonecraft and some other people, was really about preparing a person to be a full adult who can take on the responsibilities of that contractarian position with relationship to their society and their government. So they're saying if we as women are supposed to be able to fill our role in society, we need education, and then we also need the right to vote so that we can actually do the thing that we're supposed to do, right? But this contractarian position is very, very different from the kinds of arguments that earn social rights, that allow you to dress differently without being slut shamed. It's not just a different issue, but there's fundamentally a different ethical approach, a different ethical claim being made. And I thought that I would spend a lot of time on that on my blog, and I ultimately really haven't, because I just found that I don't like teaching all that much when there's not interaction. I really liked leading those discussions when I was in classrooms, and so I thought I would like it on my blog, but there's not really the energetic back and forth. We all agree to read something, we come in the next week, we have this discussion about it, and I might frame it, but lots of people are engaged in it, and the blog gets to feel very didactic in what I think is a bad way when I start doing those sorts of history lessons. And so I really haven't done that nearly as much, and I really have commented more on current events issues than I thought I would. The blog started out as one thing, and it changed, and I don't regret it, although I do think that maybe sometime I need to get back to some of these other things. Maybe a book is the appropriate venue for those, or whatever. But it's interesting to see how you can enter into this enterprise believing that one thing is important, and then coming out the other end after a year or two or three and realizing that no, that really wasn't what was important, or at least that really wasn't what was important that could fit well in this format.
Well, I just want to mention one thing for the audience out there. Is Cryptike mentioned about doing guest blog posts. That is a great way to get into this sort of thing. Is we're all very receptive to people writing to us and say, I care very much about issue X. I've written this little essay about it. Can you post it on your website? Not the commercial spam that I get all the time, but if you've got something you genuinely feel interested in, it's a good thing to do. Good way to get your foot in the door.
I actually got started on that myself. I'll talk more about it when it's my turn, though. But just wanted to bring that up.
Okay, Sarah.
Hello. Can you hear me all right? Right, my blogging history is now feeling a lot less illustrious compared to the kind of writings that PZ and Cryptike have been producing. But I got started back in 2005, and it actually had nothing to do at the time with hot button social justice issues or religion or anything of the sort. I got started in the world of mommy blogging, where you write about your children, and you also get involved with writing about the issues of the day. And because this was before Mumsnet really took on the whole transphobic stance that they have since adopted, the issues of the day in the parenting world are all things like breastfeeding and how you get your babies to sleep, and I'm sure you're tremendously excited by all that, but believe me, put it this way, it didn't feel that different from debating religious dogmas of people. Anyway, I did this for many years, and in 2015 I got interested in getting back into religious debating and that sort of thing, which is something I'd had as a previous hobby back when Yahoo mailing lists were much of a thing. And so I started a fairly small and insignificant blog called Thoughts from an Atheist, and just wrote about my reasons for getting into atheism and so forth. And then late in 2015, I discovered Free Thought blogs, and I am not sure whether I should mention this given subsequent events, but the way I discovered it was in fact through Richard Carrier, because I'd read his work previously on infidels.org and thought, no, I wonder what he's up to these days, and Googled it, and he had a blog on Free Thought Blogs at the time, and I started reading the other posts that are on there, and it's like, wow, this is this amazing blogging network where they write about all this exciting stuff. Perhaps one day in my wildest dreams I could aspire to blog there, but you know, surely they must only take extremely special experienced, brilliant, talented authors. And then some months after that, Digital Cuttlefish posted a post in verse, of course, inviting new bloggers to join, and specifically saying we want people who are actually fairly ordinary and write about things like knitting patterns or whatever. And I thought, they might take someone who can write about parenthood in that case. And I put in an application, and greatly to my surprise, it was accepted. And I remember getting the post through telling me I'd been approved. I was actually off work for the day because my daughter had a sore throat and I was staying off work to look after her, and lo and behold, this landed in my inbox and completely made my day. And I very hastily had to think of a good blog name, and to be honest, I think it might have been a bit of a silly one, but there you go, it's the one I've got. I'm on the Geeky Humanist blog, and that was how on 14th of March 2016, Pi Day for those who know it, I started the Geeky Humanist blog. And I didn't have any great plan for what I wanted to blog about, and mostly just blogged in reaction to other things I was seeing, and, you know, did some posts taking down transphobic myths about transgenderism and so forth, and looking into that sort of thing, and just, you know, writing fairly random stuff really. And then some years further into that, into blogging, I'd been spending a lot of time reading blogs that do detailed, snarky reviews of terrible books. I don't know if anyone out there has read Anna Mardoll's blog, or Libby, who used to do Lovejoy Feminism, or Jenny Trout's blog. They do this thing where they take really terrible stuff and just go through, or, you know, even stuff that's maybe popular but has its very problematic aspects, and go through it bit by bit, pointing out, you know, where they got it right, but also all the places where they got it wrong. And because I've always been a major bookworm, I thought this looked really interesting, and I started getting into doing that. And I'm also a very sporadic poster, as some of the others here have mentioned that they're infrequent posters. Yes, I'm afraid that's definitely me. But yes, I've posted every so often, just gradually working my way through things. And in fact, the first book that I went through was an apologetics children's book, which I did jointly with my daughter, who was 9 when we started and 11 when we finished this 8-chapter book. So that gives you some idea of how slow I am at it. But it was a book called Cold Case Christianity for Kids, part of a famous series that some of you may have heard of. Anyway, we went through and had a delightful time, just both coming up with very snarky comments about the many problems with the writing style and the arguments.
Wait, hold on a second there. Cold Case?
Have you heard of the Cold Case series?
I have. That's why I'm reacting like that. It's like, what? Did they want to find out who it was that killed Lazarus in the first place before the Jesus-y stuff got underway, or what?
For those of you who haven't heard of the Cold Case series, it's written by a police officer, and you know that there are many apologists who have this sort of particular hook of having converted to Christianity. And for example, you will have heard of Lee Strobel, who did the whole Case for Christ thing, blah blah blah, which is about, oh, I I am this. I was this skeptical atheist, and when I looked into Christianity, despite being a hard-nosed journalist, I was convinced by the evidence. Anyway, so J. Warner Wallace is someone who did a similar thing, and his stance on this is, I'm a police officer, and I can tell you that having investigated the case of Christianity the way a police officer would, I can tell you that the evidence is enormously compelling and got me to convert. And
investigate the way a police officer would, what, assuming all the brown people are guilty, or
but I don't think that was quite it. But reading, having read his work, put it this way, I am a little worried about the quality of police investigation taking place in wherever it is he works. So yeah, I'm kind of concerned about that now. So yes. Anyway, that's how I got into book blogging and book snarking, and I went through it jointly with my daughter, making contributions from her point of view of being the age group that the book is actually aimed at. And we spent a couple of years going through that, and since then I've been working on a couple of different things which I'm still working on, which are both still books. And that is basically how I've spent my 5 years on Free Thought blogs. And I guess the other very significant memory I have from my time on here, which someone is probably going to mention, is that a few months after I had joined Free Thought blogs, on the basis that this person I had once admired used to post on there, and that's how I found the network. This whole enormous scandal blew up that some of you might remember or have heard of, involving the person in question. And I actually don't know how much it's a good idea to bring up about that, but that was one of the major defining features of my early months on Free Thought blog. So that was kind of interesting, in a may you live in interesting times kind of way. But
probably sad that by that very circumlocucious description, I'm not sure which of the particular blow-ups that was referring to.
Oh, that was the original one, when the accusations were made against him, and we suspended his blog, and he got very annoyed and did a
him. So it's the litigious guy, is it?
That's the one.
Okay, the litigious. There was various.
I'm not sure we can narrow it down to one litigious guy, but he's a particular one we've had problems with. Anyway, for those of you who don't remember, he did a "You Can't Fire Me, I Quit" and blasted off to set off his own blog, and then some months after that started suing everyone in sight. And yeah, that was an interesting early introduction to Free Thought blogs. Anyway, so I'm still blogging away on my usual intermittent basis, posting chapter reviews as I go along of the different books I'm working on, and you'll still find me over at Geeky Humanist, and I guess that brings us up to the present day.
Yes, that was a great way to get introduced to the blog, wasn't it? Hello, we're being sued for $2 million.
That bit came later. First of all, it was the whole should he stay or should we go? Should he go? We have to investigate this. And yes, I do remember the way all of that blew up.
Welcome to our newly landscaped minefield. Watch your step.
Yeah, that's about it.
Christian.
Yeah. I commented on the original Furuncular back in the day, and also on a lot of other science blogs. I was actually very active as a blog commenter for quite a few years. PC used to, his first blog, he actually had a ranking of who had the most comments, and I used to be in competition with one other person. Back then I was studying and not studying very, very insincerely, so I was spending too much time on the internet, including blogs, but I actually follow all along with all the science bloggers to science blog and made a lot of comments here. I created my own blog in 2007. I just checked. I couldn't remember. Called Pro Science, and was not as in I'm a pro scientist, but as I'm for science. And I was trying to write about science in a kind of layman's way and just telling about that. But that was basically what I did. And then I started coming with a lot of social justice nonsense. So, I mean, I was, but I must have been fairly kind of moderate about it because I didn't know if the Science Tour was a conservative fund, but I was actually, when that started up, invited to become a member of that blog network. So, yeah, it just required me to handing over the keys to my blog. So, so now, no, thank you. Yeah, that was a little bit weird. I didn't realize that. Anyway, that's a bull there. But they literally wanted me to give them passwords to my blog for that, which seems a little bit odd. Anyway, before I started my blog, I actually was talking about guest posts before. I actually had 2 guest posts at Respectful Insolence about Danish autism studies, or actually showing that vaccines didn't cause autism. So as far as I know, I'm the only guest blogger he ever had, but I could read the original articles in Danish, so that kind of helps when you write about it. And yeah, I came about on board about the same time as Sarah, got the same nice introduction to the minefield, but I have been involved one way or other with just about every other of the big confrontations in science blogs and in free thought blogs. So, I mean, I knew what I was getting into. It wasn't a surprise for me. I used to be a very regular commenter on Abby Smith's blog, and then she turned really, really bad. Abby, I can make you happy saying she spelled her name differently. That was the IE instead of a Y. And she was very insistent about that. She hated the Y. so
I mean, that's just a bad sign. If you've got somebody trying to blog about science and they hate why,
yeah.
you've got to ask why. That's the point.
That was not her thing. Sorry. Anyway, as I said, these days I don't blog as much as I should. I have a lot of. I'm trying to write a few posts about Danish politics. That might be interesting, but the thing is, things change so fast. So every time I think I'm ready, things have changed. So, but I kind of reached the point where I just say, oh, maybe I should just publish it anyway. Nobody will know that it's not true any longer. But so that might be what I'm doing. Other than that, I think there's no real need for me to take more time. I think that's pretty much it.
Delightful. Brinkman?
Yeah, basically, I got my start in blogging just before the rise of blogging. Started Babbler in 1998, and I pretty much hand-coded the early pages. And it was pretty much, at the time, I lived in Bolingbrook for about a year, and I was wondering, well, what if Bolingbrook had a tabloid, some of the Weekly World News? And Bolingbrook, Illinois is like a fairly new 50-year-old suburb in the Chicago area. So it's like very flat, it was lots of strip malls back then. Kind of seemingly ordinary, but it was like, what if there was something mysterious going on? And that started my years-long journey to writing about the inner workings of Bolingbrook, and I'm coming up with conspiracy theories and getting on the nerve of the then Mayor Roger Clare. So I think he still yells about me to this very day, even though he's retired. And basically, for Free Thought Blogs, I've been reading it since the beginning, and it's really helped with my continuing education about feminism, racial issues, as well as atheism. And I can say that over the years as I read it, I found myself agreeing more with the bloggers, like PZ, and less with the people in my skeptical group at the time. And so finally, one day, I just said, no, I've had enough, I'm out. And then after many years in the wilderness, came back to Chicago. And after my second attempt to get into the Free Thought Blogs network, I succeeded. So yeah, you first you don't succeed, you can apply again, and it's not that rough. Just make sure you have samples to show them what your actual writing would be like. So there's no surprise. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I appreciate, I see my presence here as more giving back to the network that's given me so much. And I learned so much, especially about trans issues, racial, and I'm still learning. And that's pretty much it for me. And thanks to everyone in past and present who's blogged on Free Thought blogs. Almost everyone. Forgot about that.
Everyone who's done it without causing a severe package of problems afterwards.
Mhm.
Jeffrey.
Yeah, so I started blogging at recursed.blogspot.com in December 2005. I had to go just now and look at it because I had no idea when it started. And I did that for 11 years and then applied to be a blogger at Free Thought Blogs in 2016. And it's mostly the same content that's on my Blogspot blog. So what do I write about? Mathematics, especially bad mathematics, intelligent design. Some of you might know I played a very tiny role in the Dover trial, where I got to meet other people involved in combating intelligent design. Wes Ellsbury and I wrote a paper, it's my only biology paper, together about intelligent design and how bogus it is. I write about bad science and about bad journalism and about moose, which happened to be my favorite animal. So it's kind of eclectic, and it's just about whatever
They are
interests
delicious.
me. Yeah, it's about whatever interests me. And unfortunately, my job as a professor of computer science at the University of Waterloo takes up so much of my time lately that I've spent most of my time on that and not writing. But, you know, that job's going to end, and probably sooner than later. So I'll have more time in the future.
Yeah, I know the feeling. This has been a really bad year for all kinds of things. So,
And I guess I should also say, I've admired Peasy's writing for a while. I met him in person once in Toronto. I think we all went to the ROM to look at stuff.
oh yes,
And I gave Peasy a trilobite, if I remember right.
which I still have somewhere around here. Yeah.
And I've met Ed Brayton once at a dinner in Michigan, and he is very, very, very sorely missed. It's a tragedy to have lost him.
Indeed, yes. I guess I'm up next. Okay, we got to rewind back a little bit for me. Depending on how you do your accounting, I'm either a second or third generation atheist. Really sort of grew up in a secular bubble, but of course there's these weird intrusions of these weird preachy people talking on TV when I was flipping through, Sunday cartoons and the odd funeral and all that, which made me kind of go, okay, there's something weird going on here. It wasn't until I went to a Catholic high school that I actually figured out exactly what was going on. What was happening here is a lot of people were sort of drawing strength from ritual and tradition. A lot of the things that, the Catholic Mass and all that, it had been going on for centuries, even millennia. And it's kind of nice to actually sort of have that link to the past in your hand. And people were drawing strength from that. The whole God stuff, nobody actually believed in that. It was nonsensical, it was far-fetched, complete bullshit. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm in college, bouncing around, from various roommates, as you tend to do as a student. And I happened to encounter a roommate who was quite religious. And I got talking with her, and to my utter horror, I realized she genuinely believed in a god. I was missing out on some things, apparently, in my life. So I took to the relatively, new internet to try and figure things out. And this was about 2004, I think, or so. I'm not quite sure the exact date, but that led me to the giant explosion of books related to the sort of post 9/11 book boom that we had. Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and all that. grabbed a number of their books. I've still got a couple of Dawkins books sitting on my shelves. I think I still have Sam Harris's first book, the one that made him famous. Anyway, also, I had a look online and I ran across this science blogger, really big into cuttlefish. I wasn't too big on the biology stuff as well, but he had done some cool thing with crackers, which apparently is a big thing in Catholics. I don't know. I mean, I missed all those Catholic things when I was in Catholic school. But it's fine, don't worry. But anyway, checked in on him every once in a while. Just kept up on it essentially, and then I think it was around 2011. It was a very casual thing. Like, for instance, I more or less missed Pizzagate. Not Pizzagate. Pepsigate. To give you an idea of just how casual I was. But around 2001, I saw this blogger announce that, hey, we were setting up a new network and all that, with a lot of, just sort of the deliberately atheist content. And I mean, this I sort of considered as my community, And so I'm like, yeah, sweet. Join up with that. So I'd sort of been an on-off fan of Dispatches from the Culture Wars before. It was a former stand-up comedian. He was quite funny overall. And also, with the move over to Free Thought Blogs, that introduced me to Ophelia Benson at Butterflies and Wheels. And I really liked her writing style. She had this sort of smarmy, sort of off thing, which I really liked and all that. At which point, my life kind of went in two different paths, depending on where you looked. Online, this is around the time of Elevator Gate. There's the Stelznow lawsuit as well. There's the grenade thread, which again, as mostly a lurker, I never really participated in much. But when I saw the comments for threading, and I jumped in later on to try and stem the damage to some extent. So I saw all these controversies sort of roiling a community I had sort of grown attached to. At the same time, I was getting into university, and I had been taking women's studies courses. And while I would consider myself somewhat of a feminist back then, I was a very rough and uncultured feminist. And certainly did not actually do the homework on the studying and all that. Generally in favor, read the arguments and all that. But it wasn't until I actually went there that I actually picked up a proper education on it and went, aha, I get it. And so a lot of this was basically just me going, wow, these fellow atheists and all that really don't understand feminism or social justice and all that. They really sort of need someone to sort of help act as a bridge. So at a time where most people were sort of driven away from the movement, I'm like, oh, wait, no. I've got a way that I can actually sort of step in and teach, what some of this cool stuff is from the social sciences side. And yeah, that's sort of fast forwarded until about 2015 or so, after a bunch of controversies where I went to Facebook, posted a big long rant about Christina Hoff Sommers, because I was arguing with some atheists, some local atheists I had been friends with at the time, who were defending her and saying she was a great feminist. And I'm just like, oh God, I really have to educate you people. As part of my Facebook group, MA Melby spotted and was like, hey, how about you? I like your writing. Let's give you a guest spot over at Semantics, the blog I've got on WordPress. And so, yeah, I hopped over there, wrote a bunch of posts, poked at a bunch of TERFs and all that. Then came Ophelia Benson sort of being revealed for what she was. After initially defending her, I sort of realized, oh shit, I'm wrong, tried to educate other people, blah, blah, blah. And especially after that, sort of got onto the point of like, you know what? I've been hanging about free thought blogs. I've been thinking about maybe becoming a blogger, but deciding, nah, I like being in the background. I like hovering and all that. If I really want to sort of contribute to this community and make it a better place, I better actually just step up and start blogging there. So I applied and I got in, and I am basically an outrage blogger. So congrats to me, I guess. You're all stuck with me. Yes,
Well, I
and
mean, they could get rid of you if they really wanted to.
oh, I'm sure. Someone could
Like
just
having
punch
you
a button and the blog would go, but whatever.
Yeah, that's the thing. Strictly speaking, we've all got that great big eject. Ever since it had to be installed because of the Thunderfoot things, all those big eject things underneath all of our seats, and PZ just pushes the wrong button and it Twing!
It is. I've already got the proper
Don't worry,
chair and
I've
all
got
that too.
good button discipline. I know which ones to push and which ones not to.
Good,
So
good.
you're
And
saying you're good at pushing buttons.
Some people would agree with that, yeah.
So I guess that brings it to me. It's funny that HJ would end there with almost end with mentioning Ophelia being revealed for what she was, which is unfortunate, because it would be difficult to describe my history with free thought blogs without saying that was me. I had been a reader on FTB for quite some time, and being a contributor of various mostly annoying content to or annoying comments on the various blogs that were there already. Actually, at the time, I also used to follow HG on semantics for a while. But when I used to follow Ophelia because I liked it too. And what I hadn't realized, something that I think, I could easily be wrong here, but something I think tends to happen is there was a certain kind of blogger, of atheist skeptical content creator back in the day, whose whole thing was less about trying to find the truth and more about acting like they already had. And so therefore, a certain sense of superiority over other people, a certain dogmatism, essentially. Honestly, I don't know if you all remember the Penn and Teller show. I feel like that whole, I agreed with about 95% of the actual content of that at the time, at least, but that felt like that was that in a nutshell. Like it was all about being superior to something else rather than actually dealing with trying to find the truth or trying to bring people into something that would be make things better for everybody. So yeah, so I was reading for a long time and then saw Ophelia sort of going until finally I actually commented directly, do you think trans women are women? Just yes or no. And that was what sort of went coom. It's been a lot of changes. I mean, it's been, I guess, free thought blogs, you could say, it's been kind of unusually tumultuous for something that was so small. Or, I mean, relatively speaking, nobody here is world famous and on a great deal of TV, even though arguably maybe some of us, and no, I don't mean me, should be. But yeah, it's like the commenters just said, a lot of smug theism. I do appreciate that. There's a lot of smug everywhere. I used to, actually, something I'm going to mention, I used to really like the Cuttlefish blog. I was very sad when that stopped happening. And I did see Cuttlefish in the chat there and mentioned wanting it to rhyme. So I'll provide a little bit there. There had been a Cuttlefish blog who would with their verse demagogue, but they had to flee. So now they've got me, a desolate poor analog. I do the best I can, but I simply cannot live up to the Cuttlefish standard. Come back, Cuttlefish, come back.
His blog is still there. He just needs to start typing into it.
Blog's there, yeah, but you know how it is with Cuttlefish. If they don't want to be obvious, they can be completely just hidden against the background of the space, and nothing's really going to. You can't find them easily. It's all very camouflaged and pretending to be a rock, which I understand that. Things get frightening. Pretend to be a rock for a couple of years, and it's been a very frightening few years. I think it would have been nice to be a rock since probably since the end of 2016, but this is where we are instead. So let's move on. So given all that, what I want to hear from everybody is what should free thought blogs, and by extension, atheism, skepticism, be in the future? Where should we go from this terrible, terrible place we've all found ourselves in, with the world dying around us and there's new Nazis? I don't like these new Nazis. PZ.
Oh, that's such a huge question, though.
Isn't it? Well, that's why it's good
Yeah.
for discussions.
Yeah, one of the worries I always have is, are we promoting the bad guys by fighting publicly against them? And are we doing the right thing? Because you know the old "don't feed the trolls" nonsense never worked, but we give so much attention. Donald Trump should not have been president. Why was he president? Because the press kept giving him airtime.
Well, that, and it turns out that a great many people in the United States have rather questionable moral standards.
Yes, well, but I think they felt justified because, hey, look, this guy who holds the same views we have is on TV all the time. So I would like to see some changes in our tactics, and I don't know what they would be. I would love to hear from other people telling me what is the best tactic to deal with these people, other than just simply ignoring them totally.
Unsurprising, I have an opinion about such things. I've one thing I have noticed during this pandemic is really the lack of knowledge rather than bad. I mean, there's a lot of bad actors out there, but there's a lot of people who don't actually know a lot of stuff and who are actually basically science illiterate. That's why, I mean, blogs like Jeffrey's is are really so important also for free for blogs, like helping people actually understand science and the science posts that, I mean, I rarely do, and PC does, I mean, quite frequently, but get drowned out by some of the other number of posts. So I think a lot of the thing is just basically trying to communicate science, I think, and try to teach people how to understand and how to be careful about sources and stuff like that. Because that's the big thing. I mean, we see right now a lot of doctors say nonsense as well, but people point to them. But let people go one step further and understand how to understand it and how to be critical in a good way. And I think that would also spill over on a lot of the things we also fight against, because a lot of the stuff is, I mean, racism is pure scientific nonsense, but if you learn it all your life, it's hard to how to handle it.
I agree, but I also worry, maybe science is too narrow for this, because we've got people who've got some fundamental logic problems out there, and that's what we have to deal with. So, for example, the other day I was dealing with a relative who will not be named, who is trying to insist on all these fringe ideas, like, COVID, it's only as bad as a cold, and you're protected if you're O negative blood type, and all this other stuff. And when I tried to push back on them, they tried to throw studies at me, usually crappy studies, but they tell me, oh, but this article, this science article says such and such. And I just told them, okay, if you're going to go with the science says that vaccines are the way to go, that we've got huge studies that demonstrates the safety and efficacy of the vaccines. Why are you not taking vaccines? There's a deep disconnect in there where people are using science as sort of a show gimmick to persuade you that they're smart, and they just cherry pick the science that fits what they want to believe.
The right-wing media machine has really leaned into that, because there's something I want to just throw in a small disagreement with Christian there. It's not simply a matter of ignorance. It's a matter of disinformation. And in fact, all the way to the point that there's been a lot in the last few years where, for various political reasons, various groups or politicians or whatever are throwing shade on the idea that knowledge exists. It's not even a question of disagreeing about what the facts are. It's often is disagreeing that facts exist. This is where you get this concept of my opinion, but I'm entitled to my opinion. No, not when it's an opinion that can be tested.
Yeah,
It's also
pretty
very
much.
it's very
go ahead.
interesting that thank you. It's very interesting that you've heard a huge amount of right-wing criticism of postmodernist epistemology, and yet that's what you get from them, right? Because they keep running up against facts, and they can't outrun the facts, and so they retreat into and it's not even I hate to say postmodernist epistemology, because they don't. It's not like they have it correct, right? It's a caricature of postmodernist epistemology, but they retreat to their own caricature, and it makes it clear just how much of what they say about us and about the left more generally is projection.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have been sitting in comment threads for, over a decade now. Sort of observed the dynamics and put a lot of thought into this. Again, my whole thing was sort of coming into realizing that people actually believed all this nonsense. And so I put a lot of time and effort into actually thinking about how exactly do you get rid of it. And unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. Sorry, if you just want like one answer which is going to do it, no, there is nothing that's going to do it. I apologize, but that's just how human beings work. Having said that, go ahead, Abby.
I was just going to say, although for the record, trying to ignore them is absolutely not going to work. That just lets them babble unopposed. There was a poster on Twitter I used to really like before I left Twitter, because outside of this person, Twitter is largely a cesspool, who used to say, you can't keep ammunition away from the people with an ammunition factory. They're going to make shit up, no matter what we do. They're going to use their own networks and attention and bankrolling by wealthy people who enjoy the truth not being known in those cases. Boy, that sounded conspiracy theorist, but they literally do that. That's what Fox is. Yeah, but there's no point in trying to shut up about them, because they'll have press one way or the other. You may as well try to help make it bad press.
Probably
and
one
they've
of
got a bigger bullhorn than we do.
Yeah, make it bad press and give people the facts. We're not brainwashed, so they can defend themselves or at least learn more.
Yeah, one of the most influential things on my thinking actually was a series of blog posts that PZ had up a while ago, basically asking people why they became an atheist. I think it was about 100, posts overall. And I studied those, and I compared them against all the stories I could find of people who had become Christians from atheists. Stacked up the two, and for me, the most notable thing is, why did people become atheists? Is because they had moments of quiet contemplation to themselves. They saw people arguing online. They saw good, arguments being made. They then went up and followed up on some other things, did more reading, and quietly over time sort of went, oh, hey, this is the right idea. If you want to change minds, it's usually sort of a quiet, slow, wearing down process. Keep kicking out the content, keep kicking out good arguments and all that, and eventually people will come over. It's not guaranteed. There's always going to be a small selection of jerks, but there's nothing you can really do about them. If you just keep, grinding away at the problem, you will eventually grind it down to some extent.
And along those lines, one of the things that I noticed too about these kinds of apostasies was when people converted to atheism, it was because they thought about the issues. They actually worked through the ideas. When they went the other way, it was authoritarian, that somebody they respected told them, this is the way it is, this is the way you have to be. And one of the big causes of the chasms that have emerged in atheism is it became obvious that there are some atheists who are taking this whole idea on the basis of authoritarian points of view. Richard Dawkins said it, therefore, this is the way it is. Christopher Hitchens said it, therefore, and that's kind of the antithesis of what we want out of something called free thought blogs.
I think on the subject of people, you know, how you counter people, I think it is worth remembering that a great deal of the time you're not going to convert the people who are saying these things. We're talking to the audience. We're talking to the people who might otherwise believe the myths that are being spread, and we're putting a voice out there to counter those myths.
Yeah, there needs to be a voice for counter the myths. Otherwise, you can't really. There's no hope.
Yeah. And I'm with Abby. Ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. There are ways to, like, generally, it's also very careful to sort of pick your battles. Like, I have written a ton about transgender athletes in sports. It was a giant thing for a while. You can go back in the blog archives and look at it. I'm spooling up a new series about Michael Shermer, a specific interview he did with a transphobic author. And it turns out he actually just recycled a lot of the same ideas. And so rather than actually just repeat the same arguments over and over, I'm actually going to signpost and be like, okay, he's repeating these ideas. I'm going to use it as an excuse to get an old draft, which I probably should have published ages ago, but that one's going to come out with a new argument that I should have made way back in the past, but I'm now going to make now. And that's sort of what the progress. That's sort of what the progress looks like, is calling out these arguments for the same tired bullshit it always is, or it usually is, and pointing out that these are people who claim to be smart, who claim to be skeptical, who claim to be following the evidence, and you're just out and out straight up libeling, making baseless assertions. I mean, there's one point, in fact, where Michael Shermer himself openly says he has no evidence for a belief that he has, but he's still going to believe it anyway.
And promote it.
Yes.
Which actually I think is something worth considering. Transphobia, aside from being really popular amongst unpleasant people, is an interesting case study if you take a couple of steps back. Because a great many of the people who are promoting these unpleasant ideas and inaccurate and anti-scientific claim that they're not transphobic, claim that they are actually being scientific. This is the same group of people who will throw the standard intellectual dork web, facts don't care about your feelings, except they're not using facts. They're using their feelings. You wind up with a lot of people who are, there's no word for the kinds of people, but the behavior is scientism. I mean, we've talked about this before. The people who will assume that they are rational, assume that they are correct, and then thereby use that to judge, assuming that those pieces of scientific information that support their prejudices are the right ones, and the ones that deny their prejudices, even if there's a lot more of it and it's better, don't count. So you wind up with these people, and I do believe in a lot of cases, probably most, they sincerely believe when they're saying it's facts. They sincerely believe these things, and it all comes right down to epistemological axioms, just to get completely left-wing wordy with it, that they're not examining. I mean, in the case of transphobia, for example, 99% of their arguments don't even make sense unless you start from the assumption that trans people are fake. Like, you have to actually start from, there's no such thing as a real trans person, by which I mean somebody who really is a gender that they're claiming to be, that they were not assigned at birth, as opposed to, they'll usually respond to them, no, of course there's trans people. Look, there they over there wearing the dress that they shouldn't be wearing. It's like, no, that's the same epistemological violence. You just don't believe it. regardless of what the actual science says.
So I have a little takeoff on that to take things in slightly different direction.
Oh,
One of the
please go
things-
ahead. Take it off for us.
Oh, yes. One of the things that I think that we can do is consistently reframe debates. One recent example was there was a, I'm going to get this wrong, but I believe it was the Daily Beast published an article about how when Nancy Pelosi kicked Jim Jordan and some other Republican off of the January 6th panel, that this was politicizing the investigation into the insurrection, when in fact the investigation had been politicized by the Republicans, and really what was going on was the Daily Beast was announcing its intention to lie to its audience and say that this is the responsibility of the Democrats, because I don't know why, because they felt it was too difficult to tell the truth, that it had already been politicized by the Republicans, that the Republicans had shot down a bipartisan committee. I don't really know why, but they were saying that they were agreeing with the Republican framing, and I think that framing is incredibly important. And one of the things that I've been fighting against in terms of framing for quite a long time has actually been the word transphobia, which is not to critique you as a person, Abby, but I find it very interesting that we're so focused on transphobia with relation to trans people, but racism with respect to people of color. I believe that there really are white people who have internal psychological fears about seeing Black people in their environment, right? But we don't talk about Black phobia, because to be perfectly honest, if you have your little freak out at seeing a Black man and, oh my God, he's dangerous, and you don't enact that in public policy, and you don't discriminate against people, and you don't treat them like shit, we don't fucking care. That's your issue. You get to work that out with your therapist. Now, if you're afraid upon seeing a trans person enter a bathroom, that's an issue for your therapist. It is psychologically insightful to mention that this person might have transphobia, but it's not an issue of public policy. The issue of public policy here is to sexism, right? It's the actual oppression of trans people by non-trans folks. It's the passing of laws. It's the anti-trans violence. It's these other things. And so, although people talk about transphobia a lot, and I think that there's utility in the concept, the primary utility of the concept of transphobia is actually for the transphobic people. It helps them understand what's going on and maybe helps them move past it and whatever. And I don't fucking care. Like, I don't care if Hitler was afraid of the Jews before he gassed them. I care that he gassed them. Right. And so,
okay. It feels like you've been actually kind of caught in one of the what is it? One of the semantic arguments that I tend to see a lot from the right, which is, but I'm not afraid of them. It's really just a matter of the fact that whatever insert thing here, phobia, is the blanket term in, I guess, colloquial sociology. Is that a thing? Essentially, on the left, for various hate behaviors, it's not a question of we're claiming that they are actually afraid. I'm pretty sure the vast majority of people that I would deem transphobes aren't afraid at all. They just hate our fucking guts.
No,
and would like to see us all dead. It's not actually a phobia in that direction.
I don't disagree with you that that's the colloquial use. I'm not misunderstanding that. What I'm saying is that there's value in reframing, and there's value in speaking up about, like, I think that, because I was there a couple decades ago and talking about these arguments, like when people were first using the word transphobia, it may not be so true nowadays, but really this came from a place of, people were very explicit about the problem is transphobia because the oppression grows out of this irrational fear and blah, blah, blah. And if we take care of the irrational fear, and this was part of the whole coming out movement, right? It was encouraging trans people to come out because as they get to know us, they will be less afraid of us, and then they will act badly less often. And so there were a number of ways in which this coincided, and I'm not at all confused about the contemporary colloquial use, but I think that paying attention to the language matters, and I think that even when the Daily Beast reports the facts correctly about who nominated whom to the January 6th commission and who kicked them off, and quotes them accurately as to why and all that kind of thing, when they say that the committee was not bipartisan, like, sure, we can colloquially understand that as referencing this idea that the Republicans will label it as partisan, and that is, in a sense, one meaning of partisan or bipartisan, these related terms, right, is whether or not the parties agree about it. But it's also, it's also a misunderstanding, a drifting away from the original meanings of these words. And I think going back and having these conversations about what these words mean, why we use them, how the right has come to redefine, or how, even if it's not the right, how these words have come to shift in meaning over time. I think those are important conversations to have. I bring it up not specifically because necessarily transphobia is like the worst example of this, or the most pressing example of this, but because we're talking about atheism, right? And we're talking about social justice and where we would like to see these movements move. And I think that one of the things when we're complaining about epistemology, we're complaining about people who think they know things that they don't actually know. When we're complaining about Shermer saying, I don't have any evidence, but I think that we can go back and say, well, then that's not skepticism, right? You say you're skeptic, and skepticism has come to mean this particular movement, right? But it also has this other, more original meaning. And I think that we can challenge a Shermer and say, well, you can say you're part of the skeptic movement, but this isn't skepticism. And as we go back and address the way that these meanings have changed, I think there are opportunities to have conversations that challenge people's fundamental beliefs.
Well, certainly that's true. I guess it's a philosophical thing. In terms of challenging language is obviously a useful thing. There's good discussions to be had there. But I personally feel like that sort of thing is more useful within the left. Like we can pick apart what arguments we're making for ourselves, what's more precise, etc., as opposed to when trying to address the general public, in which case we kind of have to use whatever is the most common term in those cases in order to minimize the chance of being misunderstood. And as opposed to when yelling against the active detractors, in which case I'm inclined to think that what we actually need is heavier, harsher, easily repeatable talking points of some kind with the truth behind them, but still, rather than trying to make the semantic arguments, which even when they're correct, wind up not landing very well when that's the environment we're trying to address them in.
I mean,
I think it is important to take a hard look at the semantic. I mean, pro-life, pro-choice, the whole sitting around that shows very clearly that the semantics matter. Allowing the anti-abortion crowd to claim pro-life as a mantle has been a disaster, and it's taken a long time to kind of get away from that. I think it's important to look at how to frame it from the start in a way that makes sense. And I think that's an important part of the transphobia is also putting a burden on the person rather than on the behavior, which might be I mean, it might be true in many cases, but it also allows people the easy way out. I'm not phobic. I'm just trying to protect my daughters or whatever nonsense they're using, right?
Yeah, and now that I've come to think of it, I think maybe the problem is we're talking a bit at cross purposes because I think we're using the word semantic to actually mean two completely different things here, where one is an examination of the process, like what the chat is saying. It's about whether we need about institutionalized bigotries and what are the underlying feelings, etc. In that case, we're talking about the actual precision of the terminology and what's going on here. Like that's the anthropological examination, whereas the other half is actually branding. And it's the branding that the right is really, really good at, and we suck at so much. And when I'm thinking about a lot of these things, I think actually, usually I'm thinking of it in terms of branding, whereas everything CD just said was spot on in terms of the precision of the matter and what's actually going on.
Yeah, branding is useful, but it does have its limitations. I have seen branding, used within transphobic circles as evidence for cult-like behavior. Because everyone keeps repeating the same phrases, it's evidence that, oh, we're all brainwashed and repeating the same basic things.
Yeah, but they do it.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's another one of those, well, they're going to say that no matter what we do. So forget that.
And there's a danger of, shaping your rhetoric based on what the most extreme people do. We don't really care about the 5 or 10% of, transphobes that are out there, so long as they're not able to set policy and change those things or have much impact on culture themselves. Let the little bigots, slowly die out on themselves. Fine, whatever. What we're trying to aim for is the 90%, to get a mass, popular change of opinion on there. And slogans are incredibly handy for that. So do not sleep on them, but also recognize their limits.
That was interesting. You said something about going to extremes there. Is branding as a concept something that can, in and of itself, be taken to extremes? Or is it a matter of a thing you're trying to do with an underlying message when the message could be extreme or not?
Well, certainly. You got to separate form from content. A lot of transphobes, you can sort of classify them into a number of different categories, but there's a high-level one which has been especially the focus of my ire, who say with a nice straight face the most virulent, sort of nasty, human rights violating kind of things. But because they present it in a nice philosophical package, it doesn't necessarily come across that way. You have to spend time, refuting and all that. The gross transphobia, where it's just, baseless slurs and all that, that's relatively easy to combat. Most people can look at that and see it's false. It's the other stuff that I'm worried about. But the problem with coming up with sloganeering on that is... I've lost my train of thought, sadly. But, yeah. Sorry, Abby. I derailed myself. Oh, sorry.
The problem is the limitations of the process itself and winding up in a situation where we're behaving too much like the other side. Is that where you're headed with that?
Well, the problem with that, again, it's sort of, using the extremists to sort of set our patterns of behavior. That's a lousy idea. It should never be done. Having said there's also a wide range of interpretation for what we're doing. A lot of bigots actually say that, no, we're the reasonable ones, we're the ones sort of acting responsibly and all that, and it's only through a lack of self-reflection are they capable of getting through that. Superficially, it looks so much, bigotry looks so much like social justice work, that to the point that they actually take social justice terms and use it to their own ends and use social justice tactics, activism and all that you find on, the far right actually tends to mirror a lot of what you find on the left. So just because a technique is used by the right doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. But honestly, they've been stealing a lot of, the progressive side's best techniques anyway, so you can sort of more or less think of it as stealing it back. Concern yourself with the ethics of the technique. Don't lie to people, don't try and mislead. don't bulldoze over other people's rights in order to sort of get your way on this. At the same time, we are fighting against people who aren't fighting fair, and you have to always bear that in mind when coming up with any sort of tactics or messaging behind the scenes.
Huh? Makes sense. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Well, I just wanted to take note of a comment that somebody was mentioning, that phobia implies the issue is more individual and less with society's oppression. And I think that that's part of what I was trying to get at when I was saying that I don't care if Hitler was afraid of Jews. I care that he gassed Jews, right? The focus on individual psychology implied by, or at least connoted by, even if no longer denoted as word meaning has drifted, connoted by the terms like Islamophobia and transphobia. These things imply that the individual psychology is important. And I think they also subtly lend credence to the right's fantasy that our idea, our goal is thought control. When in fact, I really, like, if you don't want to work on your own fears and you don't want to overcome your phobias, I don't care. That's your choice. Go to a therapist. Don't go to a therapist. I don't care about your thoughts. I care about whether you're engaged in hate speech. I care about whether you're engaged in violent crime. I care about whether you're engaged in, manipulation of government policy so as to institute or maintain oppression. Like, these are things I care about, but what's actually going on in your head, whether you're actually afraid, whether you're actually angry, whether you're actually thinking about having a donut, I don't care.
I mean, that's fair enough. If people really want to be bigots, they can do it as long as they do it behind closed doors where nobody has to see them.
That's exactly it.
So what terminology should we be using instead of transphobia or homophobia or Islamophobia?
Well, I think that because there's not a single easily recognized term to take over the colloquial definition, I think that there's room for debate on that right now. But I think that it's also not that hard to be clear. We can say, the oppression of gay men. We can say, the oppression of lesbians. There are word phrases that we can use. They might not be snappy slogans yet. And we can work on coming up with snappy slogans, but we're certainly able to choose not to use the word that we have reason to be concerned has connotations that don't support our message, right? I mean, Abby's absolutely correct. It has a clear colloquial meaning that does support what we want to address. But I think that I've made the case that it has these connotations. It also has a backstory of meaning, right? The coming out movement back in the days when October 3rd was important. We had coming out day, and it was a big deal, and people talked about why to come out and blah blah blah. And this selection of the use of the word phobia to incorporate into homophobia and transphobia was very intentional back then, and it very much was focused on individual psychology. And even if the colloquial meaning has shifted, I think that there are reasons to be concerned, and I think that we can choose new language. Maybe it's not as snappy yet. Maybe somebody will come up with a perfect, snappy, well-branded term to focus on the social and oppression aspects of this at some point. And that person probably isn't me, because I'm wordy as fuck. Sloganeering isn't what I do. But even if we're not ready with the slogans right now, I think that we can be intentional about what we're saying. We're focusing on the oppression, and your psychology is for you to manage.
I think that's a really good thing, but we also have to remember that no matter what we figure out, there will be a cries of oppression. TERF, trans exclusive radical feminist, is apparently the most worst slur you could call anybody. I mean, I remember when it was coined back in the day on Hoiding Around. sound blog. I mean, it was really a way of trying to not make it into an aggressive word, but now it's apparently if you use it on somebody on Twitter, they claim that you use the N word or something. So you also have to remember that they're not arguing in good faith, all of them. So we also have to just be aware that sometimes you can't win.
Yeah.
Interestingly, we don't actually have an equivalent in this particular case, because I was just thinking in terms of when we the words that we do have for kinds of bigotry that don't say phobia. They're the ones that tend to be ism, racism, sexism. Those are the popular ones, so to
The
speak.
classics.
Yeah, are based on a name describing the class of property that's being discriminated from and to. What's somebody's race? Now, I mean, obviously, there's a very, very good argument to say that race is itself bullshit created to make racism be a thing, but it's about that. It's people of one race deciding that people of other races are inferior. That's racism. Sex is people of one sex, and that gets quotes too, given the way things have gone lately. Deciding people of another sex are inferior. There isn't actually a word for the class of ideas that includes both cis and trans as concepts that I've ever heard of. If somebody knows a word, I'd very much like to hear it.
Well, logically, it would be genderism, as far as I can see.
Well, would it be, though? Because genderism implies people of one gender are saying that people of another gender are inferior, because trans and cis are not of themselves a gender. Rather, they are classes applied to larger groups of genders.
So it's a fair point. So we don't have a word that encompasses the question of whether you're cis or trans in the same way that gender encompasses the issue of whether you're male, female, or non-binary. So without such a word, you can't make a word that's a parallel of racism or sexism. So yes, I don't. I think we probably don't have an answer there. So what we've got is what we've got in terms of the terminology. I feel like we could go down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out how to rebrand it, and I'm just wondering how useful that would be in practice.
I think it's something worth thinking about. Probably not something worth continuing to talk about for the entire rest of this webcast.
I'd like to comment on what I think is a very useful comment someone's just made in YouTube, which is on the YouTube comments, which is it useful to differentiate between transphobic behaviour and people themselves as transphobes? And I think this is an excellent all-purpose point for addressing problematic behaviours from people, that it needs to be focused on don't do this thing because X, don't do this thing because you are hurting people with it, don't do this thing because these are the harms it's causing, but focus on the not doing this thing, not on what's in your heart, not on whether any of the bones in your body are racist, transphobic or whatever, not on what the person is as a person, but on you need to stop this particular thing that you are saying or doing. Here is why this is harmful. Whatever your thoughts, feelings or intentions are, you need to stop this thing. And I think that's a very helpful way of looking at it and approaching it.
No doubt. I mean, that's where the discourse seems to have moved with things like racism. And it's the institutions versus the behaviors versus the individuals. It's all a question of what needs to be fixed. It's really sort of the overall version of what Cryptike was saying about, don't care if you're doing it, if you're unhappy or afraid, you just don't hurt people with it.
Yeah, it is rare. It is rare that people get up in the morning and say, today I will be evil and hurt other people. Maybe Roger Stone, and I mean, he got a Nixon tattoo after all, so he must know he's evil. But the rest of the world usually perceive themselves as being...
Roger Stone literally dresses like the Penguin. Like he looks like a 60s Batman villain. He must know. He's
Yeah,
happy.
and he has a Nixon tattoo. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't get that and believe you're a good guy. I mean,
No, I mean, in his case, it's not even a question of no self-awareness. We'd have to assume he doesn't own mirrors either.
oh, he's on his back, so he doesn't have to look at it. But
I just mean in order to not know. I mean,
oh yeah, you know about his penguin tendencies.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the chat is saying cissexism and cisnormativity, and cissexism maybe, although it's awfully hard to say, as I've just demonstrated twice in a row. But I don't think cisnormativity. That one's a little different. That one's not so much the prejudice as it does a factor of the prejudice whereby it is assumed and expected to be what people are. It's the assumption that it's normal rather and the expected. It's the non-deviant version of things.
The default.
Yeah, the default. That's what it is. Like a lot of this just seems like the straight white dudes of the world getting angry that they're not seen as the default anymore.
Yeah, seems to be a common problem in all the isms.
Yeah. Which I guess ties into some of the last questions I had in mind, which is we've discussed this a little bit, but in more specifics, how much should we really care about atheism, per se atheism? Because it seems to me, at least, that we would have a lot more common cause with people who are inclined towards secularism and kindness and stamping out prejudices than we would with somebody who is very happy with the prejudices we have, thank you very much, but in the process doesn't believe in anything supernatural.
I've got to say, I've always seen atheism as one of the least important issues. I mean, it's something I find interesting to debate up to a point in terms of this is an interesting hobby and for getting into philosophical discussion about, but it's a really minor point compared to various other things, I believe. I mean, there could be a God out there, and I would still believe that structural racism is wrong, that laws that discriminate against trans people are wrong, that, you know, I would still be out there fighting for social justice issues regardless.
I'd say it's important in terms of discrimination against atheist people or the cultural acceptance of religion. I mean, personally, I grew up in Missouri and Oklahoma, and it was like pretty much expected to go to church. And it's like my mother and stepfather had to get married because they were moving to Oklahoma and they were afraid of what people would happen. That's part of the religious thing. But other than that, I mean, I think we should be working with other causes. It should not be about eradicating religion. It should be about people who face pressure in some ways, working together to create a better world. My thought.
My thought is that organized religion is more of a problem than religion in general, and that's mostly because organized religion have a bad tendency of enabling bigotry of all kinds.
I think that to the extent that atheism is important, or I think that the extent to which atheism is important is approximately equal to the extent to which the mass of the electron is important. It's actually occasionally useful to debate or investigate. It's occasionally useful to plug into a certain series of arguments. But, you know, what the particular mass of the electron happens to be is not as important as the scientific process by which we come to those answers. And, you know, I think how we think and how we communicate with each other are much more important than than any given answer. And that's not to say that the answers can't be judged right or wrong or whatever. I mean, the mass of the electron is a particular value. I'm not saying that truth doesn't exist. What I'm saying is that socially, for humans, there's not a reason to care whether the mass of the electron is one value or another. We're already here. We're already living in this universe. How we communicate with each other, how we investigate the world around us, these are much more important than the particular answers that we come up with.
So this is all a big argument that, well, I shouldn't say argument. We mainly agreed that Ed Brayton and I had so many years ago and why we don't call this atheist blogs or anything like that, that we wanted this to be a place, a community where we do not enforce any dogma, and atheism can be just as dogmatic as Christianity, as we have witnessed, unfortunately, that we would be accepting of people who were believers, but in a non-dogmatic way. And so that's the main thing we're concerned with, is we don't want people relying on authority and scripture and all this other crap to support their ideas. But of course, on the other side of it, we also agreed individuals can be whatever they want. So I can be as anti-theistic as I want. Same for any of you, or you can be as conciliatory as you want. The important point is that we work together to improve secularism, free thought, good rational thinking, the world around us, better policy making, all that sort of stuff is all we care about, not how strongly or fiercely you are atheist.
Yeah, I've got similar thoughts. I'm actually thinking it's a little bit more important than more people here have said, but only just slightly more important. I mean, atheism has sort of been a background hum for me. It's shaped a lot of my views on the world and all that. It inevitably leads you to a sort of humanism, a care for your fellow human beings. And from that, you sort of get kickstarted into okay, well, if we care for other human beings, how are we treating them? The things that I focus on, the way that I actually go through and approach social justice is very heavily influenced by my lack of religiosity. But it sort of comes down to the debate over consequences versus the intent. Why exactly am I doing this is far less important than what the actual consequences are. I'm reminded actually of a debate I had with a local as well, who we were arguing over the phone over whether or not burqa ban should go forward. This person was very much in favor, argued that it was a religious mark, a religious marker. It was actually inferring a sort of interpretation for how exactly men are, how they're approached, and all that. And I actually basically agreed with them the entire way, but I made the point that if you go through and you ban it, the consequences of that actually is not that fewer people are going to be being wearing the burqa or anything like that. It's actually probably more people are, because you're not creating a gateway whereby people can actually transition off of it. If you truly want people to transition off of religion, you have to give them a better alternative. This is why it's so important to clean house within the atheism movement, to make it a progressive, welcoming place, is because if you truly care about these things, that's how you're going to get people away from religion. So social justice is front and center. It is the primary thing we're doing. But atheism is still sort of shaping it in some ways. It's not so much the rudder as, one of the keels along the bottom, if I can do a really weird metaphor for that.
So I kind of see where you're coming from and sort of agree. And if you'd talked to me 10 years ago, I would have said the same thing. I would have said, but atheism is the gateway to secularism and humanism and all these good things. But as we have clearly seen in the atheist movement in this past decade, it is not. There are a lot of fervent atheists who are also anti-humanist, anti-social justice. That atheism doesn't seem to be providing the nudge in the right direction. So, yeah, personally, I'm about as strong an atheist as you will get, and I'm somewhat radical in my views towards the church and all that sort of thing, but I don't expect those to be shared by everyone, and that's okay. That we can take baby steps together. We'll work together on these other goals like humanism and secularism that we can all agree on.
Just coming back for a second on what HJ was saying there, I don't like the idea of getting people to transition away from religion as a goal. And I think the problem with religion is it's a case of the loud, obnoxious extremists end up representing the movement in a way that isn't very fair to religion as a whole. And there are enormous numbers of people out there in huge varieties of different religions who actually very much share most or all of our views on social justice, and their religion is in no way a barrier to that. And really the only thing I want to transition people away from is the specific and relatively small, but unfortunately very influential subset of religion that tries to influence other people's well-being based on religious beliefs about what's right for them in ways that are going to be very detrimental to other people's well-being. And any other kind of religious belief, as far as I'm concerned, you can be a Christian or Muslim or practicing Jewish or Hindu or whatever, as long as I'm much more interested in what your views are on the issues that influence other human beings, that affect other human beings.
I mean, my own sort of views of religion is more or less as like a tool. It, associated with what we call religion is actually sort of like a series of patterns, memes, etc., and all that, which actually can be used to justify certain behavior. If I can go incredibly high level on that. Just because it's one way to package those all together, it doesn't mean it's the only way, though. And in fact, especially informed by what I've seen within the anti-choice movement and all that, there is a ton of sort of secular washing going on with there, where instead of thumping their Bibles, because they realized long ago that doesn't actually work, they're now claiming that all their arguments are justified by science. And you see the exact thing happening within the atheoskeptic sphere, where a lot of the same, tactics and all that are employed by religious people and all that to justify their beliefs are also being employed by atheists and skeptics. So this is not get rid of religion and all the world will be better. No, not even close. This is just almost like a background hum to what exactly, to what exactly we're doing for within the progressive sphere.
Yes. And I also noticed Thomas Sheedy in the comments there. And I would suggest that perhaps he should think about whether what he said was actually true. Did atheism put you into a great direction? Or did atheism move something else out of the way and reveal other values you had, which turned out to be what put you in the right direction? Because I think it comes in a lot of cases down to what else do people believe? Do they believe in kindness and egalitarianism, or do they believe in authoritarianism and trying to keep away the other? I think that the nature of what we would choose to believe about religion or a lack thereof can be twisted to support either of those.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think there are like two paths two general paths people take after becoming atheists. It's either, well, we're all in this together, there's no God above us, that's the progressive path, and the no one's going to control me, this kind of the selfish, individualist freedom path path. So atheism doesn't, as we've learned over the past 10 years, doesn't make you necessarily better and doesn't necessarily change the world for the better. It's just a worldview and then where you go from there.
Thomas has responded. He said, atheism put me in a great direction. It's made me even more opposed to authoritarianism than ever before, which makes me go, so you were opposed to authoritarianism before you arrived at atheism. And how then would you, do you deal with the fact that so many atheists are also actively authoritarian? Like clearly those, like empirically, those are not at odds with one another. Speaking of which, we're getting near the end, but I did want to see if anybody wanted to weigh in on one other quick little thing before, well, it's not a quick little thing actually, but wanted to weigh in on a point relevant to what we were just saying, which is that something you see amongst a lot of the authoritarian types are, despite that, saying, no, do your own research. Don't believe them. You know, there's think about what's going on, and it's all this. It's like, okay, why does that go like that? Like they act as though we're being authoritarian by believing the experts. I believe, of course, that this is ludicrous, but I think it's worth at least saying a few words on what the difference is between those two things. Would anyone else like to say some of them?
Briefly, I think authoritarianism is when you believe someone or accept what they say purely because they're in a position of authority. And listening to experts is when you believe someone because they've actually had training and experience in whatever field it is and know what they're talking about.
Yeah, but I think that for many authoritarians, they don't actually perceive the difference. They see expert as a label which is applied to grant authority, and then the authority is used in exactly the same way. And I think that I don't think that's correct, but I think that it has to do with how they engage with things, right? If they engage with their own authorities and simply believe them, there's something in psychology called the fundamental attribution error. One of the things that we judge other people by our own experiences, right? And that it makes sense because there's very little else for us to judge people by, right? And so if people are saying that they're believing experts, I think that the authoritarian personality sees that as indistinguishable because they don't see a process by which we judge somebody an expert, or even the extent to which we trust or don't trust that expert and get second opinions and get third opinions. I think it's very hard for the authoritarian to perceive the difference between the Pope and somebody who goes out and gets a degree in microbiology and studies a particular bit of something for a long time. I'm not sure that they really understand the difference there.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. And I'd like to suggest that we can say here that the difference is critical thinking. It's a question of, we don't just look at who's saying this, what are they saying, why are they saying it, what are they likely to have reasons for saying it, etc. And you have a case of, I feel bad for him after the last 5 years, but classically in the States, Dr. Fauci, who's doing his best trying to communicate actual science on these things based on decades of experience and based on having, it seems like when the right seems to want to dream up reasons to not believe people sometimes, when it doesn't really make sense if you're critically analyzing the situation around it.
It's all a matter of epistemology when you get right down to it too, that you've got to be able to ask somebody, how do you know that? And if all they can do is say, oh, I did a Google search, or point to their holy book, that counts a lot less than a Dr. Fauci who spent years studying the field.
Absolutely. So, yes, I think we're just about ready to wrap up here. I think that's very relevant. I do kind of want to mention that one thing we saw there. I thought it was a little funny. It's like that one line in the chat, big fan of libertarianism and capitalism. It was a great opportunity to table at Freedom Fest with Atheists for Liberty. And I'm like, do you know how much that sounds like a parody? Like, that's how many times you shoved variants of the word freedom in there. That actual, there's two sentences. That actual post, it sounded like somebody ate America and then threw it up. It was not a sensible thing to say, and it's actually concerning that people will not realize that is not actually a sensible thing to say.
No,
Anyway,
and the people who say that are not going to be welcome to have a blog at Free Thought Blogs, which they don't care about. But it's
no, I don't.
part of the idea.
They're probably not fans, right?
Put that
Does
network down the
anybody
street.
have
One last
anything
thing
they'd
is
like to? Yes, proceed. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that they should search the Atheists for Liberty. I may have it wrong, but if I remember correctly, I actually wrote a post about Atheists for Liberty, and it was very interesting how if I have the group correct, their purported heroes were all included people like Locke, who argued that atheists actually cannot have liberty under governments and should not be afforded liberty under governments and should have no rights that the government was bound to respect. I think it's very interesting whom exactly they hold up as, if I remember this group correctly, whom exactly they hold up as their heroes, and whether or not that actually supports their arguments.
Sometimes how I wish these people would actually read what Adam Smith had to say. There you go.
That too.
Anybody else have a last few thoughts before we clue up?
Looking forward to the next 10 years.
Are you? I'm concerned it's going to be a global firestorm, but sure.
Well,
Network-wise, I don't know about the rest of the world.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. We'll produce some lovely content from our bunkers.
yeah, honestly,
I think that one thing. I think that one thing that's worth just reminding people is partly as a measure of how far we've come, but also out of honest respect. I think I'd just like to mention the passing of Kane and I think that
Yeah.
I think that we've been here through important events in lives and not just important events to societies or to the blog network. Like, I think that Ed Braden's passing and Kane's passing are just things that we should take a moment to remember before we sign off.
Yeah. They're both undoubtedly important to everything that FTB was and probably will be in the future.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But nobody else has to die to be an important contributor, please.
no
Damn,
markers,
there
please.
goes my plan for next month. All right. I think that's going to bring us to a close. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here. Thank you, everybody who was watching online as well. Thank you even to the people who decided to post some things that we could make fun of. There's always a little bit of joy to be gotten out of every interaction if you're looking in the right places. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, y'all.
Night.
Night.
Bye.
Night. Night.